Over 2 million people gone almost overnight. That's the shocking number some reports claim were deported from Australia in 2026. Families separated, lives uprooted, entire communities vanished. But how did it happen so fast? And why isn't the world talking about it? Was this a response to rising immigration numbers, a hidden political agenda, or something much bigger and darker? This wasn't just about illegal immigrants. Even long-term residents, workers, and students were suddenly told to pack up and leave. Some say it was about national security. Others blame AI surveillance or a crumbling economy. But here's the real question. Could this happen in your country next? In this video, we're diving into the 10 shocking reasons behind one of the most controversial moves in modern Australian history. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear may change the way you see borders, governments, and freedom forever. Number 1. Stricter immigration policies. Imagine living in a country for years, working, studying, building a life, and then suddenly being told you're no longer welcome. That's exactly what happened to thousands, maybe millions, in Australia when tough new immigration policies kicked in during 2026. In the years leading up to this, the government had been tightening visa requirements, extending detention periods, and ramping up background checks. But most people thought it was just routine enforcement, until everything changed. Under the new laws, even minor visa violations triggered immediate deportation. This meant that people who had overstayed by just a few days or made small errors in paperwork were suddenly classified as unlawful non-citizens. And just like that, they were gone. Even more shocking, these new rules were applied retroactively. That's right, people who had been living peacefully for years were re-evaluated under the new system and kicked out, regardless of their history or contribution to society. The government defended these actions, claiming it was necessary to protect national integrity. But critics argued it was a mass cleansing disguised as policy reform. Many didn't even get the chance to appeal. Authorities used fast-track deportation orders, giving people just days, sometimes hours, to leave. This was not just about border control. It was a full-blown political shift, signaling a new era of aggressive immigration enforcement. But was this just the beginning, or part of a much bigger plan? Stay tuned, because what comes next involves surveillance, economic pressure, and even artificial intelligence pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Number 2. National security fears. In 2026, Australia's national security narrative took a sharp turn. While many believed the mass deportations were about visa laws or illegal entries, insiders hinted at something more alarming: a growing fear of internal threats. It started with a few isolated incidents, cyber attacks, violent protests, and alleged ties between foreign nationals and extremist groups. Although the number of actual cases was low, the media coverage made it feel like a national crisis. Public anxiety skyrocketed. Suddenly, security risk became a catch-all label, and with it came sweeping action. The government introduced new powers for intelligence agencies, allowing them to investigate and detain individuals based on suspicion alone. Even those with no criminal records, but flagged by AI-powered monitoring systems, found themselves on deportation lists. Here's the chilling part. Many people were deported not because of what they did, but because of what algorithms predicted they might do. Whole communities began living in fear. Refugees, students, and even long-time residents felt the heat. One mistake, one wrong association on social media, or a misunderstood message, and you could be labeled a potential threat. Officials justified the crackdown by saying it was necessary to preserve peace and stability. But critics warned that basic rights were being thrown out the window, all in the name of safety. This wasn't just immigration control, it was preemptive exile powered by fear and technology. If you think this sounds dystopian, you're not alone. But it doesn't stop here, because next, we're digging into the visa overstays and document loopholes that turned everyday people into criminals, overnight. We put our heart into every frame to bring you stories that matter. If this video opened your eyes, drop a comment and let's start a real conversation. And hey, subscribing takes just one click, but it helps us keep creating content that goes deeper than the headlines.
Number 3. Visa overstays and documentation loopholes. You'd be surprised how many people in Australia were deported in 2026 for one simple reason. Their visa expired, sometimes by just a few days. Sounds harmless, right? But under the 2026 reforms, even the smallest technical mistake became a reason for deportation. Whether it was a missed renewal deadline, an incorrect document upload, or a changing visa status that didn't get processed on time, it didn't matter. The system showed no mercy. Overstaying a visa, even accidentally, meant automatic removal. And the scariest part? There were no second chances. Australia's immigration system had always been strict, but new AI-driven border technologies allowed authorities to track and flag individuals instantly with zero tolerance for errors. No valid visa? You're out. Students, workers, and even families who had lived in the country for years were affected. Some were still waiting for visa extensions or appeals when the deportation orders arrived. Even people married to Australian citizens weren't safe if their paperwork was incomplete or pending. In the eyes of the law, they were unlawful non-citizens. Worse yet, many didn't know they were in violation until it was too late. With the government cutting back on warning notices and appeals, thousands were given just 24 to 72 hours to leave or be detained. In a world run by automated systems and zero flexibility policies, human error became a punishable offense. And while paperwork might seem like a small issue, for many, it led to the loss of homes, jobs, families, and any sense of stability. But what if this was all part of a bigger economic plan? Up next, we'll explore how Australia's financial struggles and job market fears may have played a much bigger role in this mass exodus than anyone realized.
Number 4. Economic pressures and job market panic. When the economy takes a hit, governments often look for someone to blame. And in 2026, migrants became the scapegoat in Australia's financial crisis. Faced with rising unemployment, inflation, and a shrinking middle class, Australian leaders introduced bold new policies under the banner of protecting Australian jobs. But behind the political slogans was a harsh reality. The system quietly began pushing non-citizens out. It started subtly: fewer visa renewals, tighter work permit approvals, and reduced opportunities for skilled migrants. But within months, things escalated. Thousands were suddenly told their work visas had been revoked with no prior warning. Even international students, graduates, and long-time employees found themselves blacklisted for job placements. The message was clear: citizens first, everyone else out. Many were shocked to discover that the job market wasn't just competitive, it was being actively restricted against non-citizens. Some employers were even fined for hiring foreign workers over locals. Industries that once depended on migrant labor, agriculture, construction, tech, suddenly collapsed under worker shortages, but the deportations continued. Officials argued it was a necessary move to, quote, stabilize the economy, claiming too many jobs were going to outsiders. But critics slammed the policy, calling it economic nationalism wrapped in desperation. Families who had lived and worked in Australia for years were uprooted, not because they broke the law, but because they were no longer considered economically essential. The tragedy? Many of these individuals had contributed to Australia's growth for decades. And just when you think it can't get more ruthless, wait until you see how the housing crisis pushed this strategy even further, turning migration into a numbers game and homes into battlegrounds.
Number 5. Housing crisis and urban overcrowding. In 2026, Australia's housing market was on fire, and not in a good way. Rent prices were soaring, home ownership was out of reach for many locals, and major cities like Sydney and Melbourne were buckling under the pressure of overpopulation and limited space. With public outrage rising, the government needed a solution, fast. Their answer? Blame migration. Officials claimed that the influx of temporary residents, international students, and low-income workers was putting unsustainable pressure on housing and infrastructure. Media headlines pushed this narrative daily, turning public opinion sharply against migrants. Suddenly, they weren't seen as contributors, they were seen as the cause of the crisis. Then came the policy shift. The government launched population control measures that included mass visa cancellations, targeted especially at those living in high-density urban areas. In some suburbs, entire apartment blocks were emptied. Families were forced out of their homes within days, not because of crime, but because they didn't fit into the new urban balance plans. Officials defended the move by saying it would free up housing for Australian citizens and ease demand. But critics argued it was displacement, disguised as urban planning. Many of those deported had been living in shared housing, contributing to rent, utilities, and the local economy. Some had even purchased property, only to be told they had no right to stay. This wasn't about space. It was about politics, pressure, and perception. The housing crisis was real, but using it to justify deportation on such a massive scale raised deeper ethical questions. And if you think housing was the only excuse, wait until you hear how politicians turned deportation into a winning election strategy. Coming up next.
Number 6. Political pressure and election strategies. By 2026, Australia's political climate had become intensely divided, and immigration was one of the hottest and most controversial topics on the table. With elections looming, politicians were desperate for leverage, and many found it in a hardline stance on migration. What started as policy debates quickly turned into full-blown campaign weapons. Major political parties began promising voters they would take back control of the country by removing illegal immigrants, cutting back on visas, and protecting Aussie values. The message was simple: fewer migrants, more jobs, safer streets. For some voters, especially in struggling regions, this narrative hit home. Poll numbers climbed every time a leader made bold statements about mass deportation or tighter borders. Soon, immigration became the centerpiece of political strategy, not based on facts or long-term planning, but on fear, frustration, and voter sentiment. And when the new government took office, they acted quickly to deliver on their promises. Mass deportations were carried out under the guise of national restoration, giving the public the sense that action was finally being taken. It didn't matter that many of those deported had lived peacefully in Australia for years. What mattered was the optics. Some political analysts later revealed that the timing of the crackdowns suspiciously aligned with polling cycles, with sudden waves of deportations occurring just before major elections or public announcements. It wasn't about who stayed or who left. It was about looking tough on immigration, making headlines, and keeping political power. And if that sounds manipulative, just wait, because next we're diving into the darker side of public opinion, how rising nationalism and xenophobia helped turn neighbors into targets and silence into complicity.
Number 7.
rising nationalism and xenophobia. By 2026, Australia wasn't just battling economic uncertainty and political division, it was experiencing a sharp rise in nationalism and anti-immigrant sentiment. What began as frustration over housing and jobs slowly morphed into a cultural movement, one that painted migrants as outsiders, even enemies. Across social media and talk shows, slogans like "Australia for Australians" began trending. Far-right groups gained momentum, spreading fears that immigrants were changing the national identity or taking over communities. The lines between fact and fear blurred, and suddenly migrants became easy targets. The shift didn't happen overnight. Years of subtle media bias, political rhetoric, and economic pressure created an environment where xenophobia was normalized. People stopped questioning deportations. Some even supported them, not because of laws, but because of the belief that Australia was losing itself. And even those born and raised in the country but from immigrant families began facing harassment, job discrimination, and increased scrutiny from the authorities. It wasn't just undocumented migrants being pushed out. It was anyone who didn't look or sound Australian enough. Government policies began to reflect this growing sentiment. Laws were enforced with less compassion, fewer appeals, and greater speed. Community members were encouraged, sometimes rewarded for reporting suspicious individuals. Deportation turned from an administrative process into a public spectacle of national pride. What's most disturbing? Many deportations were not driven by legal necessity, but by public pressure. Fear and identity politics had taken control. And when a country starts defining who belongs based on race, language, or culture, no one is truly safe. Coming up next, we'll explore how even minor criminal records, like traffic violations or old fines, were used as justification for permanent removal, regardless of someone's history or humanity.
Number 8. Minor crimes, major consequences. In 2026, Australia's immigration laws took a harsh new turn, one that left even law-abiding residents vulnerable. Under new enforcement guidelines, any non-citizen with a criminal record, no matter how minor, became a potential target for deportation. We're not talking about violent crimes or national threats. In many cases, people were deported for traffic violations, unpaid fines, or offenses committed decades ago. A missed court appearance in your early 20s? That was enough. A shoplifting charge from your teenage years? Goodbye. Even non-convictions, like arrests without charges, began showing up in assessments. The new system, driven by automated criminal background checks, flagged thousands of individuals. And, with no requirement for severity or recency, the rules applied equally to minor mistakes and serious offenses. What shocked many was that rehabilitation didn't matter. You could have turned your life around, started a family, built a career, but if your record showed a blemish, you were suddenly labeled undesirable and placed on the deportation list. One man was deported after living in Australia for 25 years, all because of a DUI charge from when he was 19. He had paid his fines, served his time, and hadn't had a single issue since. Still, he was forced to leave the only home he'd ever known. The government claimed this approach made the country safer, but critics argued it was nothing more than a blanket policy designed to purge non-citizens, regardless of the human costs. And it didn't stop there. Because next, we'll uncover how refugees and asylum seekers, people escaping war and persecution, were given no mercy and sent back to danger under the cold label of rejected status.
Number 9. Rejected refugees and asylum seekers. In 2026, one of the most heartbreaking elements of Australia's mass deportations was the removal of refugees and asylum seekers, many of whom had fled war, persecution, or unimaginable trauma. For years, Australia had maintained a strict approach to asylum.
But in 2026, that approach became colder, faster, and far more aggressive. Thousands of people, including women, children, and the elderly, were forcibly deported after their claims were denied or expired, even if they were still under appeal. Some were sent back to countries in active conflict zones or regions where they faced religious, political, or ethnic persecution. Human rights organizations around the world condemned the actions, calling them inhumane and a violation of international law. But the Australian government defended its stance, insisting that the system had been overwhelmed and that those who do not meet the criteria must leave. Even more disturbing, many of the deportees were waiting on paperwork, not because they were illegal, but because their applications were still processing. But new fast-track rules ignored delays and complications, cutting off the chance for reconsideration. In detention centers, conditions worsened. Reports emerged of overcrowding, hunger strikes, and mental health crises as people waited, terrified to be sent back to places they had barely escaped. What's more, public sympathy had faded. Years of anti-refugee messaging had worked. Many Australians believed the narrative that these people were taking resources or faking stories to stay. This wasn't immigration control. This was the erasure of the world's most vulnerable, hidden behind paperwork and policy.
Number 10. AI surveillance and digital profiling. By 2026, Australia's immigration system had entered a new digital era, one powered not by human judgment, but by artificial intelligence and surveillance technology. On the surface, it sounded efficient: faster processing, fewer errors, stronger security. But behind the tech was a chilling truth. Machines were making life-altering decisions about who could stay and who had to leave. Using advanced facial recognition, predictive algorithms, and real-time data tracking, the government launched a nationwide monitoring system that scanned visa holders for potential risks. These systems tracked social media activity, location data, financial transactions, even personal relationships, all in the name of national security. But here's the catch: you didn't need to break the law to get flagged. Some people were targeted simply for having too many connections with others under investigation. Others were flagged for patterns of movement that AI interpreted as suspicious. There were even reports of people receiving deportation notices without any official explanation, just an automated decision generated by an invisible algorithm. Immigration officers began relying heavily on digital flags, often without reviewing full case files. Human oversight was reduced. Appeals became harder. People were deported before they even had a chance to understand what they were accused of. Tech companies contracted to build these systems profited massively, while real lives were shattered by code and cold data. Privacy advocates sounded the alarm, but by then, it was too late. The system had already scaled, and it was efficient, emotionless, and unstoppable. In the end, it wasn't just about laws or policies. It was about control. And who gets to decide your fate? A government, a judge, or a line of code? What happened in Australia in 2026 wasn't just a legal or political shift. It was a complete transformation of how a country defines belonging, safety, and identity. Millions were deported. Not all were criminals. Not all broke laws. Many were simply caught in a storm of fear-driven policies, rising nationalism, economic panic, and digital overreach. Immigration became more than a border issue. It became a symbol of control, of power, and of who gets to call a place home. From families torn apart over expired paperwork, to asylum seekers sent back into danger, the mass deportations exposed a system where compassion was replaced by code, and rights were buried under policy. But this isn't just Australia's story. It's a global warning. When fear leads policy, when politics weaponize identity, and when algorithms replace humanity, we all risk becoming strangers in the places we live. So what can be done? Is there a way to protect both national interests and human rights? Let's explore the solutions, not just for Australia, but for every country walking the same dangerous line. Fixing a broken immigration system doesn't require fear or force. It requires balance, accountability, and empathy. Here's how countries like Australia and others facing similar issues can chart a smarter path forward. 1. Transparent and fair policy reform. Governments must ensure immigration laws are clear, consistent, and fair. Instead of retroactively punishing residents, policies should provide pathways to correction, especially for minor errors. Human lives are not paperwork. 2. Human oversight of AI systems. AI and surveillance can support security, but final decisions must always involve human review. Algorithms can flag data, but they shouldn't determine someone's fate. Safeguards, audits, and appeals processes are essential to prevent abuse. 3. Focus on integration, not expulsion. Instead of mass deportations, governments should invest in integration programs, education, job training, and cultural inclusion that helps migrants become contributing members of society. When people feel welcomed, societies grow stronger. 4. Separate politics from human rights. Immigration should never be used as a political tool. Laws must be grounded in ethics and international human rights standards, not short-term election strategies. 5. Public education and media responsibility. Combating xenophobia starts with awareness. Governments and media must work together to promote understanding, not fear. Migrants are not threats. They're people, with stories, families, and futures. Because, in the end, the strength of a nation isn't in how tightly it shuts its borders, but in how fairly it treats those who cross them. Before you scroll away, tell us in the comments, do you think mass deportation can ever be justified? Your voice matters more than ever. If this video made you think, check out our last episode. It dives even deeper into global immigration shifts you need to know. We pour hours of research, writing, and editing into every upload, so if you want to support content that actually informs, hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but it means the world to us. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay aware.